All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started and, welcome people as they continue to join us. Um, but thank you everyone for being part of this conversation with us today. I did first want to start off by having a land recognition. So I am here in Washington, D.C., and the land here in Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area was inhabited by the Piscataway peoples, which is several different First Peoples, Native peoples, groupings, different tribes throughout the area. And so just wanted to honor and recognize our ancestors who were on this land well before I was, and all of us here in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia area. I also wanted to start off by saying Food Recovery Network is committed to equity and social and racial justice. And we believe here at FRN that Black Lives Matter. And I always say, as we continue to write Black Lives Matter and say that Black Lives Matter, we are working towards an aspiration. We're not there yet. As we have to write it, as we have to say it and proclaim it, that means that we still need to do a lot more work. And so conversations like this are part of that equity work as we begin to honor and allow other voices into the broader conversation. We can begin to see how we are working towards the same goals. We get to know one another in very special ways. And so I am just very thrilled to have two incredible people as part of that work, as part of that infusion of equity and storytelling and just being very heart forward. So again, just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. Really quickly with the format, what we want to do is, as I said, this is a conversation to help everyone get inspired and to learn more, maybe tap into some things that they didn't quite know of before. So I encourage all of you, even after today's conversation, to get to know Leonisa and to get to know Perteet and the work that they're doing, and then the many, many different reverberations within their networks, also doing incredible work. And so as part of that conversational format, what I'm going to do is I'm first going to introduce Perteet, and then I'm going to introduce Leonisa to speak. And so we have a chance to really soak in what each of the folks have to say with us today. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Perteet with a really quick introduction. So Petite Spencer is the co-founder of Oyo Foods and also is on the FRN board of directors and is within the board of directors, our board president. And so this is just a very special conversation that Perteet and I had talked about for a really long time when we think about women leaders and women leaders of color. And then when we think about women leaders of color in the food space. So Perteet has a very rich history within the food space. And I know that every time I get a chance to talk to Perteet, have an opportunity to learn so much. And Perteet's leadership as our board president here at Food Recovery Network has really helped to shape and transform what FRN looks like. So Perteet, thank you so much for your time today. I know I only gave a very brief introduction to your many, many different talents and skills and expertise, but thank you again for your time and providing us with some of your insights and your thoughts.
Thank you so much for having me, Regina. It's always a pleasure, and the feeling is always mutual that I walk away with some great nuggets from you every time. And so I always appreciate our times together as we kind of, food space is one that's super big, super complex. And so I always leave our conversations a bit more thoughtful around how for-profit sector and nonprofit sector can do a better job kind of bridging the gaps to fix for some of the really big challenges ahead of us. In terms of a bit about my background, I've spent nearly my entire career in food. So out of grad school, worked at General Mills for several years. And then for the last 5 years, actually up until March, had an opportunity to work with a lot of really interesting founders who were on the journey to really transform the food that we eat and consume, and learn so much from them. And it was really through that journey that really inspired my husband and I to launch IO this past July. And so as you think about food equity, I think there's multifacets, but for us, one of the things that was really important is that when we walked down the aisles of large grocery stores, the food that I grew up eating was represented in the stores, and it was not until just 6 months ago when we launched IO. So grew up in a Liberian house. Today, like, you have to go to specialty grocery stores to find those ingredients, and you just want to be able to have something that reminds you of home easily. And so that was really the kind of footbed in which we launched IO. And it's been a really, really great journey. And for us, as we build a scalable business, we're always inspired by the folks who kind of taught us about this food. And so, we hope to build a rich foundation in which we can really kind of create opportunities for economic development from some of these other communities that really inspired our brand. So super excited for our conversation today, and to dig into kind of how we can work together as leaders and women of color to really transform this industry.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Perteet. That was so helpful to hear. And I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about what it was like for you to bring Oyo into, an actual business concept? Because you mentioned that there was this sense of, you wanted to bring the sense of home, the sense of comfort into the grocery store that maybe you didn't quite see there. And when you think about equity and you think about inclusion, maybe even then too, what were some of the things happening for you that you didn't see or that you did see that inspired you to start Oyo?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a few things that I both saw and didn't see. I mean, I think the most obvious in terms of not seeing something is, it's important that when we're going into grocery stores, we have access to like food that is like true to who we are, and that was missing in kind of mainstream grocery for me personally, right? It was there for a lot of other people, but when I walked down the aisles of many of the stores, like half of the ingredients we eat at home just weren't there. And so for me, it was about kind of bringing a piece of ourselves to the grocery store. So that was kind of blatantly like what was missing. I think what was there is, I've seen a mass shift over the past few years in terms of just broader marketplace really being more in tune with issues of equity and inclusion in the food space. And so through that work, you've seen a lot of really unique food concepts come to life that both are tackling some of our biggest issues, be it food waste or access to food for communities that don't have it, just more thoughtful innovation coming out of there. And that's really what inspired our brand, the opportunity to be a part of that movement. So we always thought if we could create a scalable business for IO, that would actually create economic opportunities for these communities that inspired our brand. So like a good example is, one of the items that we have in our line is called a goosey seed soup. That seed comes from West Africa. If it's not widely used today at all, but if we could create scalable demand, all of the sudden, we're creating new opportunities for farmers, communities, really changing lives through one crop. And you're seeing things like Fonio do similar things cassava, similar story, right? There's all these like really rich ingredients that have a really rich history, but just have not had the spotlight behind them. And so for us, it was about kind of creating a platform which to build awareness and in turn enrich communities. So one of the things that we've done in our short time is we invested in a farm in Liberia. So we've got about 15 acres of farmland that we're actively cultivating. That's land that was like going unused, right? And that crop yield is being used to like change lives for women, right? Because through that crop yield, they're able to kind of create their own businesses, their own commerce, which then will enrich their lives. And so we always saw the brand as a bit of a reflection of our experience and being able to work towards a more inclusive grocery system, but at a much higher level, a platform to create economic opportunity for those who didn't have it.
That's amazing. I can't wait to try some of these foods. And one other question that I have before I ask Leonisa for your thoughts, quickly on what you've heard from Perteet, is how are you structuring OYO in terms of your workforce? What does that look like now? And then what's your trajectory into the future? Maybe whether it be the folks that are helping you here stateside, but then you also mentioned just one farm in one country in Africa. Maybe if you wanted to touch upon what that workforce looks like for you and what that means for you.
Yeah, so we're still lean team today. So it's my husband and I mostly on most days kind of as the primary workforce. But we're excited about the momentum that we built in a pretty short time, as we think it really will enable us to scale. I think for us, our starting point has been the sourcing and being really thoughtful about like who we partner with on that front to really create kind of meaningful opportunities for some of these communities that have been overlooked. And so that's been our starting point, but we hope to, like I said, I think for us, it was about proving like we had a lot of folks early on as we were selling and saying like, I don't know if people will be interested in this. Is there a market for this food? Who will eat this food? And so part of it is really kind of proving to the naysayers that there is actually a scalable market of folks who have just been overlooked for too long. But through that scale, our opportunity is really to build out a kind of full supply chain and team, really empowered by those beliefs that we have around kind of enriching the communities that inspired our brand.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, Perteet. And I know, we'll continue to dig in to many of the things that you said, but I did want to turn it over to Leonisa, before I give you your full and formal introduction to everyone listening in. Just based on what you've heard, someone being in the food space yourself in a different way, and we'll learn more about that in just a second. I just wondered, from what Perteet has said about OYO and her entry into the food world, was there anything that stuck out to you, Leonisa, that you wanted to reflect on and bring into the conversation?
I really loved just the thread of representation that Perteet mentioned, just in terms of that plays such a major part in just pushing for the idea of what like people can do and what they can see. Like we need somebody like Perteet and her husband like pushing forward this idea of like there's space, there's something missing in the market, because that kind of helps like folks think about, well, what else is missing and what else do we need? Because there are so, we live in such a diverse world, right? Diverse cities, diverse places. And it just made me think of all the things that, I live in New York City. And so, hearing about foods like agusi or fonio, like are kind of familiar to me. But to think about being able to go into a supermarket and like pick up the materials to make that and not have to go to like a specialty store or like a specific neighborhood or community, it's just excited to think about.
I agree with you, and thanks for that. I love that, the thread of representation. So present in what Perteet said. I agree with you 100%. And so I did now want to turn over to Leonisa by way of an introduction. Another contribution to this conversation that we can then begin to weave through together, and audience members included. So please do chat any questions that you have for Perteet, for Leonisa, or for just the concepts in general that we're raising up together. And so Leonisa Johnson has been working for almost a decade and has tremendous experience designing, teaching, and managing youth-centered food education programs in New York City. I mean, that alone. And what Leonisa does is just she provides opportunities for those students to expand their knowledge and their interconnectedness between food, culture, and history. And so I just think about, the students of today that Leonisa is interacting with, they become the Petite Spencers of the world later on, because they have opportunities to see other things that people have been able to do with their careers, with their passions. And so I just learned about all these foods that Perteet mentioned. And now just thinking about hearing about these foods, interacting with these foods at such a young age. And so, Leonisa has spent over 4 years as a kitchen teacher and is currently a program manager with Edible Schoolyard, New York City, and is also a native New Yorker, which is really fun too. And also being a New Yorker, you have to get out to those restaurants, when it's safe to do so. It's just such a food city, and as is Chicago, where Perteet is, and as is DC, where I am. So I think we all have that shared love of, actually eating that food. And so, Leonisa, I'd love to turn things over to you to, give space and give breath to some of your experiences when we think about this topic that joins us all together today, which is women of color, women leaders of color, and women leaders of color when we think about food and the importance of food. So please take it away, Leonisa.
Thanks. Yeah, I have always loved food. And for a long time, I thought I wanted to be a chef, and then I quickly learned I did not. And so working with students in food has been a way of combining like two of my very favorite things. Like children are fun and exciting, and seeing them experience either new ideas or concepts around food. We do a lot of talking about where your food comes from, and they grow and they garden. And so that is exciting to see like city kids learn about broccoli being a flower, or like how to start seeds. And a major part of what I do kind of ties back into that idea of like representation, where I think a lot of the students that I work with, and even the communities that I go into, they hear the term like healthy and nutritious, and they don't see somebody that looks like me as a representation of that type of like lifestyle and concept. And, one thing I try to do is like encourage the communities I work with to define that for themselves, right? Like a lot of times programs like mine will go into a community and try and like dictate what should be happening, what students or families should be consuming. And that's not what this work is about. It really is about uplifting stuff that's already going on. And so I love to build relationships with the families and the students that are there and really highlight the foods that they eat at home, bring that into how we grow things in the garden, how we talk about food, the nutritious staples that already exist. And if there's ways to enhance that even more with the knowledge that I give them in terms of like growing their own food or cooking their own food or learning how to read a label. It really is just about giving students skills and opportunity to learn these things, and so they can carry that with them, right? And so the more time I spend with them, the more skills and knowledge they get. And that just makes them more knowledgeable young people. And they go out into the world and like, they know the difference between, you know, a beet and a turnip. They know that they like, you know, brown rice over quinoa. Like they have the options and the ability to make choices. And I think that's the part that's really exciting, especially because the communities I work with are under resourced. And the students come to school every day knowing so many different things and with so many vast experiences. And so I just love intertwining that with the work that I'm there to do.
Oh, that's such a wonderful concept of, you know, empowering young people to know the difference between, not only the difference between quinoa and brown rice, but I actually I have a preference for, you know, this other, you know, this other thing. I like quinoa more than I like brown rice. So I have actually, Leonisa, I've heard a lot of food journeys, and I wanted to back up a little bit to one of the very first things that you said, just in terms of by way of getting to know you a bit more. A lot of people who thought they wanted to be a chef and then realized, you know, that they wanted to do something else. So can you tell us, can you give us a little bit more detail around that particular moment in your life, or that you know, maybe it's a couple of years, several years within your life in that
Yeah,
5 years journey?
so I think one of the reasons why I gravitate towards the work that I do is that being a New York City native, being a person who attended New York City public schools, and that's the population I work with now, I benefited from a program that was similar to mine. I went to a high school that had a culinary arts program, right? And so that's where, although I always loved food, that's where I like learned, you know, this is how you move, this is how you work in a kitchen, this is what it's like. And so like we were trained and given skills, we did like catering things, and there were internships. And so, you know, in high school, I was able to see how a professional kitchen functions. And although I loved food and I loved creating dishes and recipes, I quickly learned I didn't really want to be in a professional kitchen because there is a lot of pressure. It does move quickly. And although I was aware at a young age that I could handle that if I wanted to, I'm a very like chill, calm person. And I'm like, I don't know if I want all that stress. And so when it was time for me to go to college and stuff like that, I chose not to like pursue culinary things. And I kind of found myself back in food because I did feel like something was missing. And I was already working with students, like with after school programming, and I was doing things with food just because it was something I was excited about. And so I was bringing it to the places I was working. And then it was just like a light bulb moment of like, I wonder if I can do more of this, or exclusively like kids and cooking. Like literally when I found the role that I've been in for a while, I like Googled New York City kids cooking, and it was one of like the first programs to come up. So that's kind of how I found myself in this space.
And then, you know, before I turn things to Perteet to respond to your journey, you know, Perteet did touch upon, you know, equity as part of Oyo's development, and how that was just steeped in, you know, why Oyo was started. Another part of what you said, Leonisa, that really resonated with me was, you know, people coming into communities and saying, you know, this is what it means to eat healthy, or this is what it means to do XYZ thing. And that is, I'm talking at you versus, you know, working with you. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, and maybe dig in a little bit more around, you know, how you see the work that you're doing, how that is, the DNA of that is, you know, equity work. And then the last part of that I, you know, want to ask about within all of that is, you know, what is it like to work with people who want to do the right thing, really care, but they do have that position of, well, let me just tell you what you need. How that becomes like this reverse educational experience for them. So no, that was a lot, but just any thoughts that you might have around that.
So yeah, in terms of like equity and access, I think really early on, well, I feel like I went into the type of work that I do knowing, that these communities already had a lot happening, right? Like there are all these statistics around food access, specifically the neighborhoods I work in. So like, the supermarket is X amount of miles away, or, there's this number of supermarkets in this neighborhood versus this neighborhood. But being somebody who grew up in New York, I know that folks that want access to fresh fruits and vegetables try their hardest to get that. And although, we can go into these schools and speak with kids and families about like what they're eating at home and have this idea that everybody's eating like packaged things and not fresh fruits and vegetables, we're truly mistaken, because there's an idea of what they should be eating versus like really just talking to them about the meals that they're having. And I think a lot of it is about conversation and community building. I spend a lot of time talking to families, talking to parents about what they eat at home. And like they know me as a person who's like pushing vegetables, but they engage in the conversation because they are eating these things at home, right? And so it turns more into like sharing of recipes, or like if I share this fun recipe with them, it's something they can easily add into the work that they're already doing. And I feel like that piece about communication is what people should keep in mind when you are partnering, because I think that's the idea, is that you want to partner with folks, right? And you want to talk about what's already going on, what's already happening, and how can you fold yourself into it. And that's a lot of what I do. It's just like, a lot of the schools I go to, they already have wellness programs intact, but they just don't have a person to like help pull it along. They already have school gardens working, right? They just don't have somebody to like work and maintain the garden. So there's stuff happening and they just need extra support, extra hand. It's just a matter of like understanding the resources that are needed versus thinking that there's nothing going on.
That is such a beautiful, wonderful point that I wish more more people had, and it's something that in terms of there are things happening here. There is not a devoid. And when you come with more questions, then you can begin to see, well, where are there areas of need? But let's not assume. That raises to my mind two points, and then I want to turn it over to Perteet to hear your thoughts on what Leonisa just said. I mean, there's so much to dig into, but I read a book. I don't remember the name of the author, but it's called Off the Books, and it was talking about under markets that the mainstream markets are unaware of. So, my background is in anti-poverty work via individual leadership development, and it's very expensive to be poor, to not have enough resources, and that's actually this opportunity that a lot of banks and a lot of, again, mainstream industries completely ignore, that there is a marketplace that is happening, and it's just completely ignored. So that for me, ties into this concept of there isn't anything that's happening here. And when we think about how we do ignore particular voices, we just flat out ignore particular voices. And in particular, when we think about particular neighborhoods that have asked for economic opportunities, have asked for more educational opportunities and training programs and training centers, but what we give them is police. They have all kinds of other demands, but this is what you get. And so I really see the work that you're doing to educate. It's not just the students, but it's the quote unquote, I would say the adults. We think about the work that we do here at Food Recovery Network. It's showing that there is this vibrancy, and you can be part of that. So it's a beautiful thing. But Perteet, I wondered, just based on what you heard from Leonisa, what comes to your mind in terms of the conversation that we're having together?
Yeah, so you're right. There's so much there. It was so great hearing from you. I think, there was a common thread that I heard throughout everything you were saying, which is around really access as a way to like advocate for yourself. And so I think that's so powerful. And so I think building like a healthy skepticism at a young age, like it's hard to advocate for yourself if you don't have access to like what the possibilities are. And so I love that, at a young age, you're instilling that in the kids. Like you're telling that now they know the difference between a turnip and a beet. So they will be sure to like question kind of those things as they come up and be able to advocate for what they need. And so I think such an important piece of driving change as a young person is often not the power. I think young people tend to have the courage and the power to challenge the system, but just being able to see alternate outcomes. And so the fact that you're providing them a platform to do that, even through your work today, is really, really impressive. But it also speaks to, like, as I think about the position you're in today, it was also a direct output of someone creating those opportunities for you, right? And that like at a young age, you had an opportunity to say like, hey, I probably don't want to be a chef based on this incredible experience that I had as a young person. And so I think it just speaks to the importance of kind of opportunity creation to allow people to see different outcomes and really be advocates for change in their future. I think of everything that really resonated with me, just the opportunity to, like Regina, to your point, sometimes it's just seeing a different alternative so you can effectively advocate for yourself. And one that might be atypical from what people kind of think you need or think you need to see.
It's beautiful. And Leonisa, I'm not sure if that brought anything back up for you in terms of, again, I just want to keep this as a conversation and give plenty of space. We do have a couple of questions, but I just wanted to see if that brought anything out for you.
Yeah, just the mention of like, well, two things, just a mention of like advocating for yourself, because I think that is a big motivator for me, right? One of the things that I like to do is really just equip students with, like I said, the knowledge and the skills, right? Because especially because they are so young. I work with, 3K all the way to middle schoolers. And the longer you work with them, the more information they get. And so when a middle schooler starts to put the pieces together, especially as we start to build in more, lessons that have a social justice lens, then they really do start questioning some of those bigger societal pieces, right? And so, we start off with really foundational stuff of just like, you eat vegetables because they're good for you. What are the things you eat at home? How can we incorporate more of fruits and vegetables into your lifestyle? Let's highlight what's already going on. But then when we start having conversations about like the access, what's around you, how things have moved, like the history of like, indigenous fruits and vegetables, or how things have ended up. We do a lesson around like spices and how they have traveled across the world, or like even very popular fruits and vegetables that you love that are not native to here and how they got here. When we start to intertwine those like elements of social justice, that really helps push their thinking around advocacy. And they start to realize like food is this layered, complicated thing, right? It's like, it tastes good, it's fun to make, but also like it is major in culture, it's major in community, and then it's a major like social piece too. So I love to like follow that thread for as long as possible when I'm with students.
Regina, if I could just add one more thing,
Please.
like weaving it back to kind of as women of color, as Black women kind of being in these spaces, like what does it mean? I think part of it is just our presence in these spaces changes outcomes for people, right? Because it shows people an alternate possibility. So, I have a 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. Over the past 3 or 4 days, I've gotten literally 5 to 6 images of friends of ours, but with their girls in the grocery store taking pictures next to Io, right? And like proudly like holding their boxes. And for me, like it's great. It makes me feel good, right? That they've done that. But I think the deeper insight there is it also represents for them an alternate outcome. Now, I'm not saying they're all going to go on to own their own food companies. They may choose a different path, but I think the possibility for us to be in like it creates alternate realities, I guess, for folks just seeing us in these spaces, to know that there's a lot of options, even in food, that you can pursue to drive change, and probably outcomes that you may not have envisioned for yourself in the past.
Yeah, it's totally about exposure. A lot of the times the students aren't quite sure, like I teach them, but they aren't quite sure what I do. And like I get questions a lot about like, you get paid to like hang out with us or just like, water plants or order fruit for us. For us. I'm like, yes, this is literally my job is to hang out with you guys all day long and like talk about food and cook things. And like, this is an opportunity for something that you can do when you get older. Like there is going to be more of a demand, I think, for food education. And even larger than that, just the food world is so vast. And so like by seeing me show up every day or, any special events we have, I work really hard in trying to get diverse folks to come speak to my students about the type of work that they do, especially when it is in food, particularly with the middle schoolers I work with, like, so they can see that, yes, you can be a chef, yes, you can be cooking on TV, but like, you can also be doing all these different roles that connect back to eating.
That's wonderful. I remember it wasn't necessarily food. Again, my role at Food Recovery Network, I see it as, it's anti-poverty. It's in both of your roles as well. But just thinking about the systems that prevent people from having access to the food that they need in the first place. And I've worked in different areas of anti-poverty work. And so yeah, so even for me, I remember it wasn't food, but it was more anti-poverty. When I was in college, I became an AmeriCorps member, and that was the first time that I'd ever heard of this thing called the nonprofit sector. And so, Leonisa, to your point, I learned like, wait, you can have a job where you help people, period. I just didn't grow up in a household where that was ever both of my parents, it was a very working class household, and that just wasn't even on anybody's radar to even talk about, so so that exposure and I always talk about widening of the aperture. That's all I needed. That was all I needed to get in there, and like I never looked back. I dedicated my whole career to just helping people because to get to where I was, to get into college, how many people needed to help me, and I was just, that was made available to me. So it's a beautiful thing to be able to, allow for that kind of experience. And I loved what you said, Leonisa, about, your role is to show people the education, the knowledge, and the opportunity, and they take things from there. It's a beautiful thing, and it's like, trust the young people. They'll make it happen. So I did want to turn to a question that we had from Jennifer, who's on our board of directors. So thanks, Jennifer, for being on with us today. I'm actually going to open this up to both Leonisa and Perteet, just around maybe some other assumptions that people have around food and food choice and food access. And I know, Leonisa, you touched upon it a little bit in your world, and then Perteet in the, when we think about, again, your work with farmers, you touched upon it a little bit as well. But just wondering what your big thoughts are around those concepts. And whomever would like to go first, please do.
I can tackle it first. So assumptions that people have around like just food access and food choice. I think one of the assumptions people come in with, and I kind of touched on it before, is that like you hear underserved or under-resourced communities, right? And you hear terms like food desert. And of course it looks different depending on where you are. Like a food desert in New York looks different from Chicago or DC, or, you know, someplace more suburban or and a little less urban. But people are surviving and thriving in these places, right? And that kind of goes back to my idea of like there's stuff going on. And so yes, access is limited, and more resources are necessary, and change is definitely necessary when it comes to like equity in food and people getting access to nutritious options. But like I think the idea around these folks don't have anything and are like just eating crap is an assumption that really bothers me, because like people are eating, people are getting the things that they need. Do they need better things? Do they need more of the better things? Yes. But don't, the assumption that, you know, folks are just eating like box mac and cheese, no shade to box mac and cheese, eat what you want to eat. But like there are other things going on, and there are other you know, there's cultural foods that happen in these areas. There's more pride, I feel like, in the food that goes on these tables than people like to give. They like it gets reduced down to things are unhealthy and not nutritious because folks don't have access. And that's just not true. People do care about the food that they eat. It's just the way that they get it on their table and the options that they have is the part that needs to be fixed.
I was gonna make it through our time together without tearing up, but no. Such important thoughts that you brought forward around that, Leonisa. It's so true, and we do know that when I know some of the terms, you know, I did want to toss this up before I ask Perteet to also respond. You know, when you said, you know, food desert, and some people say that food swamps, and we talk about food apartheid, and these are terms that are very new for people, and they are terms that others who've been in the food world or in the you know, anti-poverty space have very crisply defined definitions for these. So I wanted to say for myself, if I'm using a term that isn't quite you know, what other leaders in the space are using, you know, I know that I need to firm that up for myself. But, you know, just thinking about even saying the word poor, you know, I think that's something that, you know, Leonisa, you're really underscoring that, you know, people are making things work. And it's just whether how much do we pay attention to it, how much respect do we give to it. But we do know people who have been consistently under-resourced. Majority of people, you know, and we're thinking about people who have to work 3-4 jobs just to try to make ends meet. You know, I just wrote a blog about this. It hasn't been published yet, but basically I was saying my parents were working poor. There was no way that their shift work was ever going to always consistently make our ends meet. You know, that was just not an option based on how much they were making and what the needs were for the family. But the majority of people who are living like that eat at home and eat as a family. And these are things that go sort of assumed otherwise for a lot of different reasons. So I think what you said is just so important. And Perteet, I wondered if you wanted to shed some thoughts on to what Leonisa just said, and then Leonisa after that, please. You know, I'm sure other things are going to reverberate, so let's keep the conversation up.
Yeah, I'd say this is more a build than anything, but I think more than any time I can ever remember in my life, I just think the food system as we know it is in the midst of major shifts. And I like, and there's more than ever before, I think this interesting intersection of food and technology, and obviously like technology spans a lot of different spaces, but I think that is going to be a game changer in terms of kind of access to kind of healthy quality food at a reasonable cost. And I think we're starting to see that already with things like plant-based. So like if you look at like interaction indices or whatever of plant-based food, I think there's a like higher indexing population of African Americans adopting plant-based than other food types, right? And like once you think about like offering those providing those options at an economical price, I think it's like game changing in terms of growth of some of these spaces. And so, you know, even I think plant-based is a good example where you look at how technology has shifted in that market over just the last 4 years, where now more than 50% of the population is buying plant-based products regularly. Items that have existed for a long time, but just historically they haven't been very good. And so all of that to say, like, I think tech and food in that combination even further kind of busts those myths around interest in kind of healthier, better for you food.
Yeah, and that I think that part is just so exciting to see it grow, and like see people kind of get into the fold of it because, you know, like we've been saying, like folks are eating, they're surviving, they're thriving, and Regina, you made a good point about like there needs to be a level of respect for people's food and the things that they've been eating because they're very proud of it. And I think the mention of like tech in food makes sense because I think it is helping people realize that point of like there's stuff going on here. There are foods that people love and have been loving. They just need even more access to it, or even more access to better quality items.
And I'm excited to see what the growth of tech does, not only for like plant-based meat alternatives and the reduction of like industrialized meats, but also just like broadly what that does to our farming system and what access that gives us to alternate grains and vegetables that were historically hard to kind of harvest. I'm just excited to see what happens there.
Totally.
I couldn't agree more. And, you know, I'm just hearing about, food and tech, food and data, you know, this whole other realm of, you know, how does, like with farmers, even farmers that are on, 23 acres, how they're using, data systems, technology, look at me being all technical, to know when their crops need to be watered or when they need to be picked, so it's not necessarily, the big mono farms, which, from my time here at Food Recovery Network, I know that a lot of our students are interested in being farmers. They're interested in doing what Leonisa does, in terms of teaching people and growing. I was biking several weekends ago, and I biked through Baltimore, and I got a chance to have my lunch on a small community farm, and I got to talk to the farm manager. What a cool job. And so there are so many things that are opening up. So thank you both for that. And I want to make sure, and this is I'm going to say this now so that I can give you both a second or two to think about it. But I wanted to make sure, and we can put this into the chat, that people have the contact information for you or your handles, so that people can learn more about your organizations, or follow along, support where we can, either by buying delicious oil products or supporting financially the work that Leonisa is doing. But I wondered, are there ways that people can be involved in what you're doing? Are there upcoming, conversations or just things like that that you think that our community should know about? So we'll put a pin on that so you can think about it for, just for a second. But within that, I do also, you know, have one last question for you both, and that is, before we get your closing thoughts, that is, what do you wish that people knew about where you are, in the food system, in the food spectrum, that they might not know? And I think, we have touched a lot on the reduction of making assumptions about communities in which maybe you don't work that much, or maybe you don't participate in that much. I think that's definitely a theme. But are there things that you wish that people knew, or could we take this as an opportunity for, if there's something that you keep seeing people maybe consistently have a misunderstanding of, that you think we could course correct, that you would want to bubble up here? So those are, again, ways that we can connect with you. And if you don't mind at some point chatting, whichever ways those are, conversations that that are happening that we should be part of, and then just sort of something that you think people misunderstand that we can correct, or something that you think people should know that maybe they don't know.
One thing that I think people should know, if they don't already know, is that, so like, my organization, Edible Spirit NYC, is clearly based in New York, but there are food movements, and I feel like this, group that we have here are probably aware of that, but like, there are so many different food movements popping up nationally, and not even popping up, but that have existed for a while. There are people that have been doing this work for such a long time. And I think as more people become introduced to it, or start to have interest in it, just look within your own community and places that you live to see what already exists, and how you can support either food education or help with food access and food equity, because people have been doing this work for a really long time. And I think there's always a need for even more support and even more hands either on the ground or local support. I think it's exciting work, especially if you do love food. And so it's a good way to like spend your time and to connect with people, because I think anybody who works in food in some way like loves to eat and loves community. And so getting involved with organizations like mine, or things that are similar, really just enhances those ideas and concepts. So that was the first thing that kind of popped into my head.
Yeah, I think it's really great that you said get involved in the local community as a starting point, Regina. I think and the stats way better than I do, but one of the things that I'm always alarmed by is the fact that food insecurity is particularly high on college campuses. And it just intuitively to me doesn't make sense, but I think it's actually always a fabulous reminder to me that like we should look at our own backyard and our own communities, and understand that like the grass may not always be greener, and that there are these issues exist in all of our communities, and it's all of our responsibilities to solve it. And so the fact that some of these issues of food insecurity are just so prominent on places where people should be focused on kind of getting solid educations is alarming, but I think a good reminder that we all have a personal responsibility to advance these issues, to get different outcomes on the back end.
It's amazing. So much that we covered together. So on behalf of Food Recovery Network, I just wanted to thank you both for your time. I mean, I know that we could continue to talk about these various threads forever. And I do hope that we can continue to have other conversations. And so I will say to the folks listening in, if there are topics, around food, around equity in food, around access, any of the things that we touched upon, being women leaders of color, anything like that, please be in touch with Food Recovery Network. And as I said, I will send out an email to everyone the next couple of days. Give me a little bit to get that all wrapped up. That will include everyone's contact information. So we'll make sure that everyone knows how to reach Leonisa and Perteet. But with that, I wanted to turn it back over to each of you one last time before we part, to just maybe give us some closing thoughts around what you've heard today, what you said today, anything that bubbled up for you, or other things that are on your mind within this topic that you want to share with all of us. So, and again, I'll let either one of you take the mic first.
Well, Leonisa, I would just say I love what you're modeling for these kids. And if IO can be a partner or supporter in any way, please let us know. And I think you have my email.
Yeah, I think through the conversation, I thought of a few different things that would be great. Fingers crossed, hopefully the next school year we'll be able to do a little bit more in person. But I think that this was really exciting. I mean, I love talking about food and community and access. And I think just in terms of being a Black woman who is in food and leading in that way, it is a matter of just showing up as my fully formed self every single day, and being not only a representative for the communities, but I think because I identify with the communities that I work in, it makes it a little bit easier. And so I'm just, really proud of the work that I do and the example that I get to set.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you both so much. And, I will say for everyone listening in, Leonisa just brought up a really good point about how are we supporting leaders like Perteet and like Leonisa to be able to show up fully, to do the work that they need to do. And Food Recovery Network, we just had a conversation around building better nonprofits, and we did talk a lot about self-care and healing. And so again, there's so many different topics that we could all benefit from hearing, so we can widen our aperture. And I know for me today, Perteet and Leonisa, thank you so much for helping me to learn more, to understand more, to be inspired by what you're both doing for farmers, for young people and young thinkers, all alike. And so thank you everyone for your time today. I know time is an unrenewable resource. It is a very precious thing. And I'm thankful that we are all able to have this precious time together to learn and be in community. I look forward to our next conversation, and please be in touch with Perteet and Leonisa to learn more about what they're doing, because it is just so important for all of us in New York, in Chicago, all around the world, for us to learn from each other. So thank you both so much, and thank you all for listening in, and until the next time, enjoy the rest of your nights. Thank you.